Yep, do the.
Okay,
There it
good.
is.
We managed to figure it all out. Okay.
Fantastic.
So, Meg, we've talked a little bit before you got on, and I explained the rules of the game. So I think we can start if that's okay with you.
That's perfect. Apologies for the delay.
No problem. So, Nora, why don't you take it away and share your screen, and off you go.
All right. There we go. Give me. Is it working? There we go. Sorry. All right. Let's share. Make sure I'm sharing the right one. Okay.
Looks good. Looks good.
You see me? See it? Okay. So, my project basically was world building for games. Basically what I intended to do was basically a creative writing exercise that would focus on the world building for a fantasy world, and a story plot that would go on within it, as well as game design principles, because the whole purpose of the world would be to create a prospective video game within that world. And this is effectively more like almost like a game design pitch, or with a design document for the kinds of features and things that I would put in this thing. With really my the primary goals were the general world building of the world and everything. I wanted to create an outline for the story and the plot that would take place, as well as I wanted to describe features within the game that I would implement if I were to have a it's all under, it would be the type of thing where I would it's like if I were to have a development team behind me and people to bounce ideas off of, and a budget, and on a larger scale, what kind of game would I want to create? What kind of world would I want to implement? What type of narrative would I want to present? So it all kind of started around this core concept of dryads for the world. I'm sure if dryads they originate from Greek mythology. They have particularly from generally they're known as like tree nymphs, which are general like nature spirits that are protectors of the forest, protectors of nature, and things of that sort. But I really wanted to hone in. There's a particular type of dryad called a hamadryad that was the that was different than other nymphs in the fact that it is a spirit bound to a particular type of tree, usually an oak or poplar tree, that that is often more solitary, and in Greek mythology is often in need of protection. It's very like the gods would punish people who would cut down oak and poplar trees, because it would be considered like killing the spirit within it. But I really wanted to expand on that idea, because it's a type of fantasy creature that often shows up in other forms of media. It's been iterated on, expanded on, and there's multiple different versions in different kinds of media. But I really wanted to try and hone in on this concept and try and create my own version of a dryad that felt like a real fantasy species, a real like alien species in this fantasy world that I was going to create. So I ended up focusing a lot on the biological aspect of its life cycle, because that its particular type of life cycle and its uniqueness would end up branching out to create the wider world around it. In this case, it would be I came up with the idea that it would basically be like a that dryads would be literally like plant creatures that would grow and bloom into a walking mobile plant creature, something that you would often see in fantasy like treants, or if you've seen Marvel movies, they're like Groot is a walking tree person, things like that sort. And I would generally want to design the and mhm, and it would live uh for about 20, 25 so years of their life before they would need to undergo a process called rooting, where they would plant themselves into the earth and ascend into a more spirit-like form that's connected to their original body that they planted into the earth. Uh, and that's the form that most people associate with a dryad, where there's a spirit that's connected to a particular tree. And that's where I was going with it. From that core concept, what I was able to already the simple implications of the concept was allowed me to create a more detailed setting. I would set the setting in a jungle. There would be a particular grove where these dryad people would live, and they would I and I thought, and when I followed when I did my research into like world building principles and general uh the types of things you focus on, there are some big concepts, like you would need to focus on biological pressures, like why would this type of creature exist in this world? Where would it come, where would it come from? What type of culture would it create? What kind of culture would they have? What type of practices would they create? If did they have certain belief systems? What type of outside pressures would they have to contend with? They would need to make sure they had food. They would need a system. There would be a system of reproduction, which I obviously just described beforehand. But and they would and they would need to make sure they're not they can live and survive, that they don't die to outside pressures. So for example, I would create enemy basically I would create like there would be more aggressive herbivores. Like if there were living walking plant creatures, there would probably be more aggressive herbivorous creatures that would that would hunt them and things of that sort. So they would live in that way. Uh, Culturally, I decided to go with there was a you know culturally, one of the biggest cultural things that I wanted that came out of the process was the idea of matrons, where in effect these would be inherently magical creatures. This is a fantasy world. There's magic and such. They can employ a type of magic that I called laymancy. But I decided that these plant creatures would not be able to have sentient souls unless they were actually created through magic. So there would be people in the world that would there would be particular types of dryads that would be trained in the ability to actually create dryad souls, and they would be the ones in charge of actually creating new dryads and creating new life. Um, and generally what I wanted with the world building is I ended up expanding on that concept with uh, when I went into the plot and the characters within the world. I wanted to focus on the story of a particular dryad called Aaliyah, who was trained as a who would be trained as a matron, who was being trained as a matron, but had reservations about the entire concept of the entire thing of rooting. Because when working on the project, I came to regard the rooting as is partly like a literalized metaphor within the world that would in a sense of like because in the culture of the people that the Dryad people, at least within this one particular grove that I just set as a more isolated group, I I decided, it would be they would be expected to, discover their purpose in life before, during their time as a sapling, while they can be up and they can move around. They're much more mobile creatures, because as soon as they root, they would be locking themselves to a singular location. Their spirit would be tied to that plant, their original body, and so culturally they would need to decide what they want out of their life before they root, so that they can perform that purpose during their time as a spirit. Um, so I really want, so really what I did with the project was I wanted to try and focus on those on kind of some of those details, some of the roles within in their society that they would do, and about this particular character who doesn't feel like that they're ready, like they're approaching their time where they would need to root, otherwise they might, because something important with the biology is that they would wither and die if they don't root in time. They can only last for so long as a living, moving sapling person. So the plot of the story would as a general summary, would have this dryad this dryad, it would introduce the dryad. This dryad would end up becoming the main character of the game, and would go and have an encounter with a human where they are attacked by a large plant monster, and need to work together to defeat it. Aaliyah, having never met a human before, ends up having an interesting discussion with this human. Something, humans were something that they had never heard, that they had only heard of in legend, and only spoken of in in dangerous terms, as a dangerous type of thing type of thing that you should avoid. And through the course of their adventure together, they would defeat more plant creatures, discover their origins, because the plant creatures were a threat to the forest and the grove at large. They would work together to find out who's creating them and destroy them. How long am I at? And eventually they would confront the leader of the grove to figure out more the secrets of this particular grove's origins. I'm sure I explained that badly, but that's okay. I don't want to go over time. To kind of go into the game design features of the project, I really wanted to focus on it being an open world exploration type of game, like a third person role playing RPG type of experience, where you would actually play as both characters, Aaliyah and Ellis. You'd be able to swap between the two, and each character would have separate abilities that you would be able to employ when fighting these plant creatures. The primary game loop would be exploring the world, navigating the wilderness, and encountering these creatures there would be a number of different creatures that you could go out and defeat over the course of the story, and each creature would have unique mechanics that you would have to contend with while using the same set of abilities that our two main characters have. Yeah. To really focus in on how I approached integrating the world building and the game design aspects of the project, I really considered it as one whole cohesive piece that really comes together. Some of the important aspects of world building are having that interweaving, interconnecting web of logic that allows everything in the world to make sense, and that is what helps keep immersion for the audiences or the players, whatever. It doesn't matter what medium you're in, but it ends up becoming especially true in games, because games by their nature being interactive and the limitation of, you know, being of the system of whatever you've designed it, there's a heavier possibility of that immersion breaking. There's a heavier possibility of that immersion breaking for the player, but also opportunity for greater immersion since the player is an active part of the story. Even if that story is a more linear one, simply being able to control the character and make choices in how they approach a particular problem, even if the outcome is the same, ends up increasing that immersion. You know, once and on top of that, if what you're actually doing, what the player is actually capable of doing, it's their abilities, their their goals and their actions are all baked in together with the world building. It's yeah, it's all about helping increase that immersion. So for example, Aaliyah's like magical abilities that she would use to restrain the creatures in the game, the abilities that the player uses, those are explained by NPCs. They're taught to her, those mechanics would be why do they have those abilities, where they come from, and what they do, and and what they're generally used for would be explained through dialogue and through exploration and simply using them. So things of that sort. Setbacks and failures. So a big thing I really wanted to try and I guess get across is I had a lot of personal struggles over the course of working on this project. Just a lot of general mental health issues that I won't get into, but it really made it hard to put together everything that I wanted to put together. And part of the biggest things that I've always struggled with was the whole idea of putting pen to paper. I've always been a creative person, but my struggle has always been being able to try and get the ideas out of my head and onto a paper and being able to present them to other people. And what I hope to try and achieve, especially with this project, was to try and overcome that hurdle for myself. To some extent, I think I accomplished that. Like I said, I wasn't able to lay out all the details that I wanted, but and there was some things that I was never able to do. Like I wasn't able to go and get and go and be able to. I never felt it was at a place to present it for editing from like a professor or something like that. That was something that I wanted to do, but I never got around to do, or never got the courage to do, or never felt that I was ready to do. But even at this point, over the last year that I've been working on it, I've been thinking about this project constantly, whether I actually did anything with it or not. Sorry,
Take your time, Nora. It's okay.
I think generally what I would want to do differently, especially with this type of project, is that I wanted to try and remove some of the restrictions for myself. I really wanted to try and integrate that that work of integrating game design with world building and story writing. And while I feel like I was able to, you know, accomplish that to some extent, I feel like I probably would have had a better time if I had simply focused on the plot and actually, you know, set about writing it as if it were a short story. So did that a little bit. I just, I was able to write out a scene that would play out as like a cutscene in the game. But I feel like, I felt like I might have been able to learn a bit more about the writing process if I had taken it from that different angle. But I committed myself to what I wanted to do here, to intersect with game design, especially since that is really part of what a lot of what I'm passionate about with, you know, because the intersectionality between game design and world building and interactive narrative experience is such an interesting field, and I was able to study and learn a lot over the on the subject in the course of working on the project. So yeah, I really, that's it. I didn't want to I didn't want to go into too deep in all the various details that I wrote out with the world and the plot and the setting, because it would just take too long. I'd be effectively explaining the entirety of the project at that point. But so at this point, I guess if you guys have questions for me, then I'll take them now.
Okay, thanks, Nora. Can you go back a slide?
Yeah.
Did you design that slide? Or did you find it somewhere else?
I mean, I had a lot of help from PowerPoint. They have a really cool feature where they'll like suggest designs for you, and they'll include like pictures that are related to what you've done, what you've typed down, and this really worked out, and this one really worked out for me.
Yeah, that's a really cool slide. I like that. So I have a couple of questions. One sort of question that we often ask students is, oftentimes students don't get to do everything they intended to do. And sometimes they do everything they intended to do, but they never intended to finish the whole thing in the first place, but they're going to continue to work on it after the semester is over. So it sounds like you haven't done everything you intended. And it sounds like it didn't quite work out the way you hoped it would, but it was close. So my question along those same lines is this something that you're going to push further, or is this like a one-time thing for you? Are you going to continue to work on this particular storyline?
I think I will. Especially since I've been sitting with it for so long, I think what I might end up doing is what I'd hope to do is, in my free time, however long it might take me, I might actually do what I said there at the end of maybe shifting it more towards focusing on that plot line, focusing on developing some of the characters more deeply, and actually writing it out as like a short story. If as much as I would love to be able to develop it into an actual video game, a lot of it comes down to the type of ideas that I had or envisioned or laid out for what the project would look like ended up kind of holding me back, because I just don't feel, because I'm not capable of creating such a larger scale game project on my own. If I were able to have a team behind me, maybe if I had some, I do have some friends who are also designers and programmers. if they were interested in working it together on it as an indie project or something, maybe. But for me personally, I feel like to be able to finish this to be able to finish it as a story, as a world, and being able to put more into practice those writing skills more than anything else is probably where I would take this.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I don't know much about game design, but it seems like, if you're writing a script for a movie, for example, you write the script first, and you worry about actually realizing it in some other medium after you've written the script. So it sounds to me like that would be a good way to push it further. I have one question that I didn't get. Assuming that you had made this a game, right? You talked about some of the aspects of it. I don't get. Is this a game for one player? A.
Yes.
And wait. And B. You said that the player could switch roles. So I don't get that. The simultaneous. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah. So generally, the kind of the idea would be, I would be envisioning is that you would have a system where you'd be able to swap between which character you're playing as, and when you swap to one character, you can set the other character as performing a particular action while you're controlling the other character, and it would be a juggling game of swapping to one character, using their abilities, performing their role, and then swapping to the other one in order to perform their role. It would be kind of like a it would be like a back and forth, especially in phases of the fights. If the monster is up and about and moving, you would want to swap to Aaliyah in order to try and use the environment, use her magical abilities to trap the creature and create a weak spot, and then you would swap to the other character, Ellis, in order to attack the weak spot and destroy it. And that would cause a recall in the monster, and they would be or whatever. And what I envision in my mind is like are these very much larger cinematic fights. If you ever because if what's the name of the game? There's a number. There's a was it something of the Colossus or something. There was a game where you're fighting these large statue creatures, where the character has to go on, and sometimes they'll have to climb up the creature, attack certain weak spots, things like that. It could be similar to that. It could also be similar to like Horizon Zero Dawn, where you have a particular tool set where you need to employ particular tools at particular times in order to open up windows for you to attack and things like that sort. It's yeah.
Okay, I get it. I thank you very much. Great presentation. Meg, would you like to? You've got a couple of questions yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Nora, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I thought you did a fantastic job. Some things that I really appreciated was I love that you have pulled in some Greek mythology, and I thought you did a really nice job of providing some good historical context for us. I myself love trees, like everybody, but I really, really like trees. And I love all the metaphors that you can draw from trees and their growth and leaves and roots. So I really, really
absolutely. Yep.
I really appreciate this idea of rooting. So I really am going to look forward to reading your product paper in the more detail. I know you didn't want to go through all the detail here, because I think that it's very rich, and I think it's very robust, and the life cycle and this idea that these dryads, these plant-like beings, are going to root themselves after their period of being a young person ends. I think that's really and very creative. You know, our goal in having students work on a project like this, and then put together a visual and have to walk through this, is so that you can practice sharing really what you're passionate about. It's drawing on so many professional skills, and I just want to congratulate you because you did it. And I know that it's a challenge, and I know that it represents a year's worth of probably very hard work for you. I know it was hard work for you, but I just want to say that you were successful at it, and we're really proud of you. So you did great.
Thank you.
I
I hope you enjoy what I've written. So.
Well, you set it up so well, and I really am looking forward to reading more about it. My guess is you've taken Trent Hergenrader's class.
Yeah. Yes, I have. Well, actually, I did, because I took. I actually took. No, I actually took Danielle Pafunda's version of the class over the course of the summer as well, in between while working on this project. So and that class definitely helped provide a lot of insight in how to approach the world building and keeping it and making really keeping things cohesive in the way that is. So yeah. I did. I have taken a. I've tried. I remember, like, a long time ago, I tried taking Trent's world building class before, but I had some issues at the time and had to drop it. But yeah,
Yeah, either one of their classes.
Mhm.
Great, and I'm so glad to see you drawing from those experiences. I might encourage you, and I know you referenced this, I would really encourage you to maybe share this with Danielle or share this with another faculty member, because it really is remarkable. So I would encourage you to share it with someone to get some feedback so you can take it to the next level. This work is going to demonstrate your skills and competencies, and would be a great example of what you can do in terms of getting yourself ready for employment.
Gotcha. All right.
Okay, I think we better move on, because, and then now I'm thinking it really is fortunate that we only have 2 students instead of 3. But Ari, thank you very much, Nora, and I'm going to turn it over to Ari.
Let me stop that. There we go.
All right. So it was getting a little too hot in here, so I just wanted to fix that before I started. Stand by. Share my screen. Perfect. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Can't see because there's too many Zoom windows in the way. Where's the thing? There's the thing. No, not that thing. This thing. There we go. Okay. My name's Ari Sanders. I'm presenting my project on determining software that would determine a good guess of a patient's medical history based on the medications that they take. A little bit of background on myself. I was a software engineering student prior to SOIS for several years. Ran into some academic issues, took some time off to become a paramedic, and when I came back to RIT, I decided to switch, directions a little bit and try to incorporate both of these fields that I've, got experience with into one degree. So this is sort of a merging of my software engineering background and my paramedicine or emergency medicine background. Okay, there we go. So my goal with this project was to design software that will be, useful in making medical practice easier in some way. I wanted to take the knowledge from my courses at RIT and my co-op experience for software engineering, as well as my paramedic experience, and use them all for one project. I wanted to follow the principles of software engineering, and I wanted to take input from coworkers and hospital staff I ran into, and get feedback from actual people who could potentially be using my product throughout the project. So the problem that I identified is patients are often unable to self-report medical history. And if you're at, a doctor's office or on the floor of the hospital or wherever else where they have access to, great up-to-date records, that's not really a problem because you can see their whole medical history. But in an emergency context, it's not uncommon for the only information you have to be whatever the patient can tell you and whatever you can find. Often patients have a list of their medications, but don't know what health conditions they have, or they can show you the bottles, but they don't know what they take them for. So a common problem in emergency medicine, especially pre-hospital, is trying to figure out what underlying medical conditions patients have with very limited information. And when you're brand new and you don't really have, a mental library of what medications do what are they typically prescribed for, etc., it's a lot harder to complete that task, which makes it a lot harder to figure out a good course of treatment because you're not necessarily sure what's going on with your patient. And even when you are experienced, so, at this point, several years in, I have a pretty solid library of most of the common medications, but every so often I come across something and I go, I really have no idea what this is. I don't know what it's for. I can't make an educated guess based on, the ending. A lot of medications have suffixes that make it easy to tell what type of medication it is. So in a case like that, I still don't know. And while there are many existing libraries of medications, these don't focus on figuring out the history of a patient. They're typically just, a repository of facts about medications. So I effectively wanted to take that concept, but change the focus so that it's actually designed to tell you, here are conditions that make sense based on the medications this patient takes. And also maybe here are some facts. So my solution started with inputting medications into a web application. So you've got your list of medications from the patient or their medication cabinet or wherever you've got this information, and you input it into the application. It then spits back a list of likely conditions this patient might have, with additional information to help you determine which conditions are actually more likely, because one medication may be prescribed for several different things. So in that case, you may not know which one of those things the patient has, but if you have additional information such as, oh, they take 2 medications that both match this particular condition, you can make a better educated guess of, okay, so it's more likely they have that one than some of the other things it might be for. And then continuing to use this helps people to, build that mental library, because if you consistently are putting in the same couple medications and getting back the same results, eventually you're just going to know that. You won't even need to put it in. So here's some examples from, screenshots from the software. So there's the search feature in action. It's able to check from the whole database of medications and say, hey, which medications might this person be looking for, which makes it a lot easier to input them and to make sure you're spelling them correctly. A lot of patients' medication lists are handwritten and they have no idea how to spell these things. So you can guess, but you may not always be right. So this makes that a little bit easier. And as you can see, there are several medications that have already been input, and it suggested several conditions that this patient might have based on the medications there. Second example here, when you hover over one of those conditions, it will show you which medications influence that suggestion. And the reason why it also lists them again on the right side is because medications have a generic name, so that's the name of the medicine itself, and then a trade name, which is effectively a brand name. So the same way that, you know, Kleenex is a brand of tissues, Plavix is actually a brand name for clopidogrel. So on the right side there, if you were to scroll over atrial fibrillation, it would say clopidogrel because that's what you'd actually input. But in fact, Plavix is the name that it wants to display. Sorry, I had that the other way around. You input Plavix because that's the name the patient gave you. And it's also telling you clopidogrel is the name of the medication that we're, you know, searching based off of, and Plavix is one of those brand names for it. Apologize. Okay, so the components of my application here. I have a web interface, which was written with HTML5 for markup, CSS for style, and then JavaScript is the functional programming with the jQuery framework. The server, which was written in PHP, the database, which is a MySQL database with information I got from a database called Drug Bank, where they were able to give me access to their information for, you know, educational purposes. To so I didn't have to, you know, obviously I'm not manually inputting every single medication that exists. I don't know what they all are, but this was an objective way of getting that information. Asynchronous communication between the user interface and the server using Ajax. And I was actually able to get the database to do the vast majority of the heavy lifting, which is definitely the most efficient way to do it and makes it much more seamless for the user. Okay, I showed this to several of my coworkers and some of the doctors, and I got some feedback. Newer providers found this to be a very useful concept. I was able to show them some examples, and they were able to see how that would absolutely benefit them. Experienced providers, again, often already had a pretty good idea of what these medications are and what they're for, but they still found it helpful to be able to do that quickly and maybe get some of the things that they weren't thinking about, some of the medications that they don't know. When I talked to hospital people, though, I got a bit different perspective. I'd initially thought this would be great for, say, medical students, because they're also new, inexperienced providers who are trying to do a whole lot more, but it turns out that physicians actually learn about medications very differently. They learn conditions, what types of medications treat those conditions, and then what medications are examples of those types, which is an entirely different perspective than the way that I had to learn them, which was, here are a bunch of medications, now figure out what they're for. And then eventually was able to make those connections of, okay, this medication does that, and that's why it's for that. So since physicians learn that in a different way, this sort of application doesn't really have as much value to them. And that's why that other form of drug database already exists, because that is valuable for physicians. On the other hand, other hospital employees, newer emergency nurses, for example, do have some benefit from it because they don't quite learn it the same way, because that's not their focus. Their focus is more on assisting the physician. So they learn things much more similarly to how I did, where it's the doctor prescribed this. Okay, well, why did they prescribe it? And then in other hospital settings, it's not really as relevant because, again, they already have that history documented, so it's not a mystery to them. Next steps, because as I'm sure you've expected, I did not accomplish everything that I wanted to accomplish. I wasn't able to get the drug bank data completely integrated, so I only had a partial list of medications in my database, which means it's not really all that functional. It works, but it's not as useful as it could be. I wanted to change the way that we search for medications, so that the connection is being made between which medications and which conditions, based on that feedback that I got from one of the physicians, which was effectively, I want to change it to use the way that physicians think about this. So the medications would be linked to the action of the medication rather than the condition, and then the condition would be linked to the action. So it's putting an intermediate step in, but it would actually make it a more effective method of connecting those two. I wanted to add some sort of algorithm that would suggest the likelihood of each condition. That listing how many medications suggested that condition, that was effectively a Band-Aid on the problem. What I really want is I really want it to be able to go, okay, there's a 20% chance they have this condition based on these medications. There's, a 15% that they also have this condition because of these medications in addition to that, et cetera. I wasn't really able to come up with a good way to do that. And I had some feedback from some doctors, and I've done some thinking. I have some ideas, but I don't have anything concrete yet. So I wasn't able to come up with a way to do that. And then the other thing I wanted to do was I wanted to design additional interfaces. So I wanted to be able to make a mobile app so you could access it easier from your phone rather than only being able to use a website. So that's my presentation. I will take questions now.
Ari, I'm going to go first because I have a search committee meeting at 1, and
Sure.
I can stay until 1:05, I think, but then I really need to leave. But in any case, so when you first broached this idea with me, you perhaps recall that we talked about liability.
Yes.
And so that, leaving aside this project, I mean, liability is like this huge, gigantic issue in the field of medical science. So I noticed that on one of the slides, you had a disclaimer. But I'm interested in, it sounds like you talked to a bunch of different professionals from different fields within the medical profession. So what did they say about the issue of liability? If you actually did this, and it sounds like, it's a viable project, and it sounds like a lot of people thought it would be a useful thing. What did people talk? How did people address liability?
I'll be honest, I don't think most people even thought about it. You and I, of course, had already discussed that, so it was certainly something on my mind. I think that the few people that did come up with or did mention liability, it seemed to be sort of implied that we have to take this as this can't be, this is never going to be objective. This is only going to be not recommendations, but I'm sorry, my mind is totally blank.
No, I get it. I get it. The purpose is to push is to make you think, okay, well, it's probably, or it's likely, or this is the sort of that I want.
I haven't spoken to any lawyers about this, so I can't speak from a legal perspective, but I would imagine that as long as it's clear that this cannot be relied on completely, that I couldn't be held liable, but I don't know for certain.
Yeah, I think you probably would need to talk to somebody an attorney. But if you proceed, and I'll ask you about that in a minute. But so when I'm confronted with something that a predictive sort of thing, it hasn't happened yet. I'm interested in what happens. My tendency is that, well, okay, I think 20% is likely to be this, and 80% it isn't. But if you say something is 50% likely, that means that I can see how you're having difficulty finding an algorithm for that. But it's not only finding an algorithm, it's also how that predisposes you to think, okay, it's more likely to be this than that, therefore I should behave as if it is this. I mean, there's a danger, I think, when you make predictive percentage-based predictions that you get it wrong. I mean, it's very easy to think, well, 50%, 60%. Okay, 60%. Well, it's probably going to be, that is what it is then. But you forget while you're thinking that 40% it isn't that. So, I think there's a psychological issue there in not only a mathematical one, an algorithm thing, but there's also a psychological outcome that, you have to be careful with.
So, I mean, that's absolutely the case. And you're right that giving it actual numbers might make people rely on that more. That's a very good thought or concern. The reason that I'm not as concerned about this is that's effectively how we're already, forced to make these decisions anyway, is we don't necessarily know what this patient has, but we can make guesses based on these are the symptoms I'm seeing, these are the medications they're on. So I mean, it's more than just these are the medications and guessing the conditions. It's also, are the symptoms that I'm seeing consistent with that condition? Because in that case, I'm going to treat it like that, even if I don't know that they actually have it.
Yeah.
Even if I've never seen the patient's medication list, or they didn't, they don't have a respiratory medication, but their symptoms suggest this is probably a COPD exacerbation, I'm going to treat it like a COPD exacerbation.
Yeah, you can't have perfect knowledge.
Right. In the emergency context, it's very hard to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, well, yes, I definitely appreciate your concern that this might make people, treat it one way or another more likely. I think that to a large extent, that's already how they're behaving. And so it's not making a whole lot of difference in that respect.
With your COPD example there, that raises another issue, which sort of compounds my point here. That is, you don't have perfect information. Even if you had perfect information, you would still be guessing, but you don't have perfect information.
Right.
So
exactly.
that makes your guess, one remove from what it could be if you had perfect. So, but I get it. You're on the fly here. You got to do something. So this is going to help you do something that
right.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. Oh, my last question is: so, are you really going to pursue this and put this into production in some way?
I think the biggest hurdle to actually using this as a real product is actually the database. So the one that I was able to get a hold of, I was only able to get a hold of it with very, clear restrictions on what I could do with that information. So if I were to make this a real product and start selling it, I would have to come to an agreement with some company that already maintains an existing database and, probably pay them a whole bunch of money to use their data. In which case I would have to then restart entirely the process of integrating that data into this application. So it's viable, and I'm tempted to do it, but I think that's the biggest hurdle. Once everything's there, once I can access the full list of all of the medications, making all the other changes and improvements I want to do will be fairly easy. I've demonstrated that to myself with a lot of the changes and features that I've done with this, as is. But that's really the big hurdle. I think I would like to do that, but I don't know, if I want to dedicate that effort to it at this point.
Well, couldn't you reproduce all the information that you could buy? I mean, can't you do that by yourself? I mean, isn't that information available on the web?
It would be incredibly difficult to do that. Because think about just the sheer number of medications that exist. There are, thousands of medications and many different brand names for each of them. Then you've got all sorts of, the FDA has various information, but it's only part of what I need, because I looked at the FDA's information that they have publicly accessible, but it didn't do what I needed it to do. I actually looked into a lot of different databases to see if I could get this information for free initially, and found that most of them only have some of what I need, and I would have to put a lot of just man hours into making that one thing. And so it would be hard to maintain as things change over time, because then I would have to redo that task every time that there was a change.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to get somebody else's already maintained information and just use that.
So
And
why don't you
so-
just go to pharmacy school?
Right. Ari, I was going to add, you also take on, you can't take on that liability of having that updated information on that day. There are companies
Right.
that would be a significant liability that you would be taking on.
Absolutely.
So my question is, Stephen, are you at a good place? It's
I have to leave now. Thanks very much,
Well,
Ari.
thank
I
you,
really
Dr.
enjoyed that.
Oakley.
I think that's a fascinating project you've got there. I hope you pursue it further. I think it could be a really neat thing.
So Stephen, I would just add that it's okay for you to stop recording now because you'll be forced to stop recording,
Okay. All right.
leave the meeting, and that's fine.
Okay. I did it.
Okay.
All right. See
So
you guys
our
later.
my question is more about ethics.
Okay.
So, my question is, what do you do with that information? So one, this isn't
Oh, you're
so much,
talking like HIPAA wise?
well, yes, but first, my question isn't related to that. So first
Okay.
I'm wondering,
It's so weird. Zoom, you try to set it up right and it still doesn't work.
hello?
Hello, how are ya?
Hi. I was just in another meeting. I'm sorry.
Oh,
No,
Stephen,
that's okay. I figure there's always, especially with Zoom, it's like you book them back to back. There's no travel time. So thank you all for joining. I don't think, like I said, I don't think we'll need too long, but I figured with vacations next week and getting going with Zoom interviews that it might be nice just to touch base quickly. So let me.
That was funny.
Well done. I was kind of wishing that I kept the host still, because then I would have just kicked him and problem solved. But
That was, yeah.
Meg is gone too, so I don't know what we're supposed to do.
Wait till she gets back, I guess.
I guess that'll work.
Because I'm sure she wants to finish her question. I was thinking of similar turns on the whole ethical question, because I
Mhm.
remember seeing like,
Oh, she's back.
hello.
Maybe.